2 years ago, I took on the challenge of reviving a 1972 BMW R60/5 motorcycle, a bike that desperately needed a second chance. Years of customization and wear had taken their toll. The drivetrain was worn, the parts rusted and damaged, and the fuel tank a dented, faded mess. It must have lived a hard life. Without hesitation, I decided to strip it down to the frame for what some would call a restoration. The first casualty was the old modified seat, completely beyond saving. The headlight bucket's electrical components, well, totally exposed to the elements thanks to the outdated fairing that barely held together. According to the second owner, the odometer stopped at 93,000 miles. Who knows how far this bike had actually gone? Every part I removed revealed a history of neglect or maybe a relentless use. The chrome pitted, the metal dented, the fuel tank battered. The front end was caked in grime while dust and sand coated the entire bike. The brakes, well, let's just say they didn't inspire much confidence. They were clearly overdue for attention. The original chrome Zoyna silencers had seen better days, but the exhaust pipes still had a little bit of life left in them. From the engine to the rear wheel, every component needed care. Even the swing arm and subframe had to come off for a deep overhaul. When I finally reached the engine, I checked the oil, and what I found, well, some water and sludge and a trace of a little bit of oil, perfectly summing up the bike's condition. The disassembly moved to the 600cc boxer engine, a design renowned for its reliability and simplicity, but only when properly cared for. With the alternator and starter covers removed, every step brought us closer to the heart of this engine. Low compression and internal wear were evident as confirmed by the condition of its oil. This engine features a unique layout, a crankshaft above a camshaft connected by a duplex timing chain at the front. At the rear, the flywheel and oil pump are classic culprits for leaks on a 50-year-old bike, thanks to hardened seals. Next came the removal of the cylinder heads and cylinders where the most wear was found. A lack of lubrication and poor heat dissipation had left their mark, with grime caking these crucial components. Once the major surrounding parts were out of the way, it was time to extract the crankshaft, the true heart of the engine. Finally, the dirtiest task, removing the oil pan. This revealed the engine's true suffering. Metal sludge, a grime testament to its past neglect. The 4-speed gearbox needed just as much attention as the engine. A bit of heat helped loosen the housing cover, giving access to its internals. The input shaft drives the cluster shaft, which transfers motion to the output shaft, a relatively simple design, though it's made up of over 125 individual components. More heat was applied to safely remove the shafts from the gearbox housing without causing damage. Thankfully, there were no major failures inside the gearbox, so I guess I got pretty lucky there. With everything disassembled, it was time to clean, inspect, and repair or replace any and all worn parts. Shifting focus from the drivetrain, the wheels are just as crucial to the motorcycle's performance. Both the front and rear wheels required a complete overhaul, more work than I initially expected. I began by removing the tires, spokes, and wheel bearings. The aluminum rims, thankfully free of cracks, still demanded countless hours of sanding and polishing to restore to a like-new finish. The slight reflection of polished aluminum hinted at a potential this bike could one day achieve. The brake surface inside the hubs was badly worn and needed attention. A light pass on a brake lathe brought it back to factory specs for proper braking. The difference was night and day. The hubs were then vapor blasted for surface cleaning and then protected with a ceramic coating. With that done, it was time to install fresh wheel bearings. The hub was heated and the bearing packs chilled overnight, making the assembly straightforward. Once the hubs were fully rebuilt, they were paired with their respective rims, a 19-inch up front and an 18-inch in the rear. With 80 spokes and nipples in total, each rim had to be laced and offset correctly to ensure it ran true. A wheel truing stand made this process much easier, and you can even build one yourself at home. After carefully verifying and double checking spoke tension, the wheels were ready for new tires and shiny chrome covers. After stripping the frame with a laser cleaner, its true flaws became apparent. Small dings and scratches revealed the history of roads this bike had traveled. Though none of the imperfections were serious, as the frame remained perfectly straight, they required attention before a cosmetic makeover. Spot putty was used to fill the imperfections, which were then sanded flush after curing. A makeshift paint booth was set up to accommodate the three main components: the main frame, the subframe, and the swing arm. All parts were thoroughly cleaned and degreased before receiving 3 light coats of primer. Suspending the parts from an overhead door rail proved to be an effective solution. A black base coat was applied, followed by several layers of 2K primer. The results were impressive, but polishing was still needed for a flawless finish. With some overhauled components ready, I began reassembling the frame, starting with the tapered bearings for the triple tree. Handling on a classic bike can't compare with that of a modern machine, so precise adjustments and settings are critical for these bikes. The front forks, which were fully overhauled with many new components, were next to be secured to the triple tree. At this stage, all components were loosely set in place, awaiting final adjustments once the remaining parts were installed. The front of this bike is already looking significantly better than before. Polished aluminum accents such as the indicator light housings underwent hours of sanding and polishing to achieve their shine. In my opinion, the effort was totally worth it. What do you think? Once polished, the housings were mounted onto their brackets and the lenses were installed with new seals for a snug fit. Moving to the rear, the freshly painted swing arm was fitted with new tapered bearings and seals, further improving the bike's handling. Brand new cadmium plated hardware was also used, not only for durability but also to preserve the steel and add a touch of refinement. Every component was carefully adjusted and torqued to the specified settings. With the frame assembly complete, it's time to turn my attention to reviving the gearbox. The gearbox shafts were completely overhauled with new bearings installed on all ends. Fortunately, the gear teeth showed minimum wear, suggesting the gearbox received more maintenance than the engine itself. The output shaft, which enables the gear selection, was inspected and all bushings were repaired as needed. Since the gearbox cover seals the entire assembly, ensuring all surfaces were spotless was crucial. After assembly, the nuts were torqued to the specifications and functionality was thoroughly tested. Smooth gear shifts and proper kickstart engagement were essential checkpoints. For a deeper dive into the gearbox, check out this detailed video I created a while back. Shifting our focus to the heart of this bike, let's talk about its engine. In need of a full overhaul, I encountered numerous challenges including worn out parts and the difficulty of sourcing suitable replacements. These issues extended the restoration timeline by at least 6 months. Once the necessary parts were secured, I began by installing an overhauled crankshaft with new bearings throughout. The camshaft also received attention with all timing components strictly replaced with brand new ones. On the opposite side, the oil pump was fully renewed and tested for functionality. New seals and bolts were added, ensuring this engine is ready for another 50+ years of service. The timing chain, which connects to the crankshaft and camshaft, required precise alignment before the assembly. Once in place, the timing cover sealed this area, allowing me to move outward to the connecting rods. The engine block features 4 studs on each side which secure the top end components. Fresh Mahle pistons were installed into the cylinders that had been bored and honed, creating a tight, like new finish. The cylinder assemblies were then mounted onto the engine and connected using wrist pins. You can pick up the poster of this beautiful BMW engine on my website, link in the description. Next, both cylinder heads were overhauled with premium components and bolted into place. The valve train hidden beneath covers, fondly referred to as peanut covers by the BMW community, completed the top end assembly. To protect the engine, the exhaust and intake ports were temporarily sealed with special covers to prevent debris from entering. At the top, I installed a rebuilt original Bosch starter beneath the starter cover. The front of the engine houses all the repaired and replaced electrical components which remain stock and unmodified. Everything is carefully tucked away beneath the covers, and the finishing touch was the installation of the BMW R60/5 plaques. For a detailed look at the engine assembly process, click the link in the top right corner to watch more videos. Along the drivetrain, there's one more crucial component, the final drive. The assembly takes power from the driveshaft and transfers it to the wheel via a pinion and ring gear. Essentially, it's a mechanism that enables a 90-degree power transfer while handling immense torque. The first step is securing the pinion shaft within the housing and installing the ring gear. I was fortunate enough to find a new old stock set, meaning this final drive will meet the standards of a factory assembly. New bearings are pressed onto both sides of the ring gear to ensure smooth rotation. The gears must mesh perfectly, and this is achieved through the use of gear marking compound, custom tooling, measuring devices, and shims. Small, precise adjustments are made to the shims until the gears mesh correctly and the backlash falls within the specifications. For more on this, check out one of my previous videos. Once the gears are properly aligned, all the seals are installed and everything is torqued down. The final step is sealing off the gears with the final drive cover and securing it in place. Though this assembly is compact, it contains numerous high-quality parts that will ensure the bike gets the reconditioning it deserves. It's now ready to handle hundreds or even thousands of miles. With most of the sub-assemblies completed, we can now move on to the frame-up assembly. Numerous brand new parts are waiting on the workbench ready to be assembled. All rubber components are replaced after 50 years of brittleness. The rebuilt final drive is joined with the drive shaft and swing arm. The stud on the right will hold the lower end of the rear shock, while the top end connects to the subframe. After taking care of the wheel hubs, it's time to install fresh brake shoes, which have been machined in-house for a perfect fit. Now we can attach the wheels to the front and rear. Specialized high-load grease is applied to the final drive spline to reduce wear between the final drive spline and the drive dog. The rear axle is tightened and the rear brake linkage is adjusted. With a bit of effort, the brakes are functioning flawlessly. The restored headlight bucket is fitted between the support brackets and adjusted accordingly. Before setting the bike on the ground for the first time in about 2 years, we'll install the handlebars. Things are starting to look promising. Wait until you see the final results. The center stand is positioned, allowing the bike to be elevated off the ground. Additional gearbox components such as the kickstarter and shift lever are also installed. Not only are the mechanical components being renewed, but the electrical components are also getting attention. New wiring is in place along with period correct Bosch decals for the ignition coils, which look fantastic. Though unfortunately they are hidden behind the coil clamps just as BMW designed them. While they may be out of sight, I know they're there, and now you do too. Next, the wiring harness is connected running from the front to the back. Starting with the battery, power flows to the ignition switch and all the components once the key is turned. Before moving forward, I double and triple check each wire for proper resistance and good connections in line with the wiring diagram. Though this work can be tedious, it's incredibly satisfying when everything works as it should. New combination switches are installed near the hand grips. On the left you'll find the dimmer switch, high beam flasher, and the horn button. On the right there are the left and the right turn indicator switches along with the starter button. The electrical system also receives a genuine starter relay on the left side of the frame. All grounds are connected properly and also tested. The engine also gets new spark plug wires which are tested for resistance prior to the installation. On the right side of the frame, a new old stock voltage regulator is installed. After that, most wires and connectors are simply plug and play. Stepping away from the wiring, there are still many components to install. This includes the rubber dampers for the fuel tank, both at the front and back. The RPM cable, which runs from the speedometer to the engine, is another key part. The steering lock is also installed along with its cover, and it's secured with a rivet. Next are two crucial cables, one for the front brake and the other for the clutch, both vital for the motorcycle's operation. The right side of the handlebar is fitted with a new chrome mirror, but that's not the only missing chrome. The bike still requires a complete chrome exhaust system, which includes pipes with a crossover and two brand new silencers designed to replicate the originals. Fresh chrome accents truly elevate the look of a classic bike. What do you think? Oh, and I almost forgot about the rear foot pegs. With those details sorted, we'll start wrapping up the work around the engine as well. The starter cover was removed earlier to make it easier to place the engine within the frame. Fun fact, the black shroud on top of the starter cover also functions as an air intake, though it becomes nearly invisible once the fuel tank is installed. Before mounting the air intake box, the crossover fuel line is installed. The right side of the air intake box is then placed on top of the gearbox and secured with one nut. Inside this area is the Mahle air filter, which is sealed in place by bolting on the left side of the air intake box. Now I think it's time to bring some fresh color to this bike after so many years. We'll start by mounting the front fender to its brackets using rubber washers as spacers. This paint job was done locally by Shane from the Baker Boys in Edmonton, and I couldn't be happier with the results. The hand-laid pinstripes were done by Eric, who is also local to me. The precision and attention to detail on the pinstripes perfectly suit this bike. Feel free to check them out, links down below in the description. The rear fender deserves some love too, even though it becomes partially hidden once the bike is fully assembled. Securing all hardware on the rear fender is a bit tricky, but with patience it all comes together. At the back of the bike, I've added more jewelry to balance the look. This includes a red rear reflector, a Hella taillight, and 2 polished indicator lights matching the ones up front. The bike is really starting to take shape now, and the combination of colors against the black paint, chrome, and cadmium plated hardware truly stands out. Pictures and videos don't quite capture the bike's full beauty, but I'll leave that up to you to decide. With the indicator lights installed, it's time to fit the battery covers. These attach to the subframe and are held in place between the frame with 2 large O-rings. While I fully overhauled the motometer instrument, I decided to make my own mark by redesigning the faceplate. The original metal faceplate was faded, so I created a modern replica, and I'm thrilled with the results, especially since it was my first attempt. Afterward, the bezel was crimped onto the instrument housing and it was complete. I hope this detail stays with the bike for years to come. The instrument was then carefully fitted inside the headlight bucket and secured from within. To finish off the front end, I installed the Bosch headlight along with a new chrome ring. The front of the bike now glows with intricate details. As a final touch, I added a chrome headlight protector, which was an optional accessory not included from the factory. I believe it enhances the overall look while maintaining a subtle appearance. For the US models in the early 70s, side reflectors were standard. Thankfully, I found 2 good amber reflectors, as these are no longer readily available. Now let's talk about the Bing carburetors. On each side of the engine, a 26mm slide carburetor is installed, just enough to keep this bike going, I suppose. This might be a bit controversial, but the intake tubes on both sides of the bike are original. Yes, these were the ones that you saw before in the video, and they did come with the bike. I cleaned and lightly hand polished them to bring them back to life. They were not painted, believe it or not. I think the used golden brown look complements the paint job while preserving the bike's history. The carburetors were then connected to the throttle grip and adjusted accordingly. Finally, it's time to install the fully restored fuel tank. The exterior has been freshly painted and the inside received a new epoxy liner after being thoroughly cleaned. The tank is secured at the front with a rubber pad and tightened down with 2 nuts in the back. The original fuel cap was polished and fitted afterward, as it's easier to install the pin that way. In the early 70s, fuel caps weren't lockable, imagine that. Two rebuilt Carcoma fuel valves were installed and the bike is now ready for its first start. I added a new bench seat and finished off with a few final touches. With all fluids topped off, it's time to let you hear this bike roar back to life after its restoration. I hope you enjoy it. This journey has been filled with challenges and setbacks, but I'm thrilled to have pushed through and finalized this BMW R60/5 restoration. Thank you to everyone who has been part of this process. If you've followed along since episode 1, or whether you just found me through this video, I want to give you a huge thank you, and I really appreciate your support. I want to give a special thanks to Matt at Euromode Electrics that has made this project happen. He's been a longtime supporter of the channel and also a supporter of this project in specific. Without their BMW parts, I'm really not sure I would be able to bring it up to this standard. They are a BMW parts distributor throughout North America, and they supply top-notch quality parts. So I'm really happy with their support. So thank you so much. I also want to give a huge shout out to Shane that did the paintwork, and also Eric that did the pinstripes. Their work is flawless, and I'm really pleased with what they've done. Without them, I wouldn't have been able to bring this motorcycle up to these standards. So huge thank you to them as well. Now it's time to wrap up this BMW R60/5 restoration project and move on to bigger and better projects. But before that, it's time to pass on the keys to somebody that deserves this bike more than I do, and I'll reveal that in my upcoming video. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you soon.